And welcome back to the Healthy Heart Show. If you're just tuning in, it's Autism Awareness Month. And on the Healthy Heart Show, we are highlighting families and children and individuals living with autism because we want them to educate us about what life is like with autism and what it is that we can do as a community to make their world as comfortable as we possibly can. And I've just been enjoying all of my guests. You're going to hear a very intriguing and empowering interview that I did over the phone this week with Mr. Stephen McAllister. Stephen McAllister learned that he had Asperger's syndrome at the age of 5. And since then, he has taken time to learn more about how autism, Asperger's syndrome, is one of the components of autism, how that affects his life and the world surrounding him. While he had to go through many hurdles and overcome many obstacles that, people like me and you probably did not have to face, he always found a way to not only survive in the real world, but also to thrive. Now, Steve wants to share his experience with the rest of the world to help build a bridge of understanding between autistics and the people around them. He is currently a successful author who has published 2 books about autism, as well as a freelance photographer going to events and helping people get their message out through his creative work. Stephen also has vlogs, video blogs on Saturdays on his YouTube channel called Tostemac, where he talks about various topics on autism and his personal experience. So prepare to enter a world unlike any other that you've ever seen, and join me in my interview with Stephen McAllister. Take a listen.
Well, Stephen, I want to first thank you for joining the Healthy Heart Show today and being willing to share a little bit of your story with us as we recognize Autism Awareness Month. And so I want to welcome you to the Healthy Heart Show.
No problem. Thanks for having me here.
So, Stephen, I was just really amazed when I met you last year at the business conference in Cambridge, Maryland. And so I wanted you to just kind of tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your life. And in reading your bio, it intrigued me that you say that you picked up your very first Polaroid camera, or disposable camera rather, in elementary school, and that it was also around that time that you noticed that you were experiencing the world differently from everyone else. How so?
Yeah, that was actually, I started to notice the differences before I even picked up my first camera. It was actually back in elementary school where basically, when we went out to recess, sometimes we would go out to the bigger playgrounds where the neurotypicals played. And it was around during the first time I got out there that I started noticing that people weren't acting the same way I was, because back then it was a special ed classes that I went to. Like, we had our own little section in the elementary school, little corner to ourselves, where me and a few other kids with similar mental disabilities and whatnot would be there, but sometimes we would go to the bigger playgrounds where all the other kids were. So the first time I was there that I started to notice differences, and then from there, afterwards I went over to my mom after school and asked, why am I different, or why do these people act differently than me? And that was when I was first told that I had autism.
So your parents had already known that you had autism, but you did not.
Well, my mom is kind of a medical expert and whatnot, so yeah, she kind of had a clue even before the other medical experts knew. Yeah, so I didn't find out until Mom told me about it. I just figured, like, up to that point, there wasn't really anything that different about me. It wasn't until I started interacting with neurotypical students that I noticed something was different.
Mm-hmm. And when you say neurotypical students, you mean students that did not have a disability?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. So how old were you at that time, Stephen?
I was around 5 years old during that time. Good times.
And how did you respond to that? Like, did you understand what all that meant when she said, "Oh, you have autism"? I mean,
Not necessarily. Like, all I knew at that time was, like, it was just a word. And my mom described it as a special gift, that I saw things in a way that other people can't. But I didn't really understood what that meant back then. Like, afterwards, over the next few weeks, I kept on wondering, okay, what does autism mean? How does it affect my life? So what I did afterwards, over the next several weeks, a couple of months, is whenever we went to the huge playground, I would actually start playing with the neurotypical kids and kind of study them in a way to find out how they act and how I act and what are the differences between the two, that maybe there's some things that they notice about me that I can't. So that way, like, back then I didn't know how to do research on a computer or whatnot or other sources. The only resource I had was kind of the playing around I did at school.
And so you found that was a way for you to develop an understanding of the differences between how you saw the world and how kids that didn't have a disability saw the world. And I think it's remarkable that your mother described it to you as a special gift.
Well, the problem is, like, a lot of people have a misconception about autism. Even people to this day have a misconception that autism is like, oh no, it's the end of the world, it's going to ruin your kid's life. They may spend the rest of the time in a mental home, or it'll destroy your marriage, or something like that. But if people are well educated about autism, they would know that it's not the end of the world as a lot of people would fear it to be. It just means that we're born differently. The brain's wired differently. That's all.
Amazing. So tell us a little bit about the differences here. Like, for example, you learned that you have Asperger's syndrome, which is a form of autism. Educate us a little bit about Asperger's syndrome.
Asperger's syndrome is basically a higher functioning level of autism. And what I mean by that is autism is not just one mental disability one. There's a whole spectrum of it with a bunch of different names and whatnot. There's Asperger's syndrome, there's ADHD, there's ADD, there's a whole bunch of stuff. So I just happen to have a high functioning level of autism, Asperger's syndrome, which means that I do really well with, like, problem solving and making stuff and creating stuff, though sometimes I still struggle with a few other things like social skills, social cues, body language, stuff like that. It's kind of a work in progress, but there are several challenges that autistics face, Asperger or not, that neurotypicals may not have to face. That just comes, like, natural to them and whatnot. Like, one of the examples is humor or comedy. That was one of the things that I stressed about the most, because when I saw how comedy worked and how it made people laugh and smile and be happy, I wanted to replicate that kind of feeling as well. But over the first few years after I learned I had autism, it was a struggle for me, and it really frustrated me a lot. So what I did was I would watch a bunch of stand-up comedies and whatnot, like stuff I was running on TV, like Full House, Bill Cosby, some of the other comedians. And I would keep watching them to see how they form their jokes. What do they talk about in their jokes? Is it something to do with their real-life experience, or maybe something on the news? And how did the audience respond? So it was a bunch of trial and error, and I didn't really get the concept of humor or really nailed it until I was in, like, high school or college. It may come simple to a bunch of neurotypicals, but for me it was a real challenge.
And so what was that challenge? Do you think that your brain was working overtime trying to maybe analyze the joke? I mean, bring me into your world. as it relates to that?
Well, one of the things I used to do, or sometimes I still do, is kind of rewind and watch over certain segments over and over again, kind of like hitting the rewind button on like a video cassette or DVD, kind of study it a little bit, see if I can imitate that or make a little kind of spin off of it or whatnot. And a huge part of comedy is the social cues and socializing. That's a big part of it. It's not like you can just tell a joke and suddenly people laugh. The people got to not only understand the joke, but also like how you deliver the joke. That's the biggest part of it all, really. Like, you could have the best joke in the world, but if you don't know how to present to the audience in a creative way or in a way that's going to catch them by surprise, then it's not really that good of a joke. So I had to study up on how they tell the jokes, but also how they deliver in terms of like the body movements, how they say it, like if they imitate certain language, like español, yo tan marino, or something like that, but also like how they do things like the facial expressions or hand gestures and whatnot, how they use the body and not just words to deliver the humor to the audience. So
that's powerful. Wow.
A lot of studying and a lot of headaches.
A lot of studying and a lot of headaches. Very interesting. Well, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, you say on your website that life with autism is hard to explain, but you have found a way to bring people into that world and help them to see life with autism as you see it. So Steve is the author of two books. Steve, you wrote a book called Traces, an autistic pathway to creative expression, and then you have a new book coming out, or a new book release called On the Trail with Annie and Angel. Tell us a little bit about your books.
Well, my books actually started as like just college projects that was just need to get done and whatnot. Like the first one, Traces, was just like a visual art book. But then I was working with a group called the Umbrella Syndicate, and they told me about a publishing group called Perfect Publishing. So it gave me an opportunity to not to have the art book I made, not just another work of art that would just sit on a shelf and collect dust, but rather make something productive out of it. So from there, I figured it would be the perfect opportunity to use my artwork to talk about autism, because, as you mentioned, what I post on the website, to talk about autism is not an easy thing to explain, because it can be a challenge to kind of find the right words and whatnot, because if you kind of say certain words wrong or get the wrong message out there, not only are people not going to listen to you, but they're also going to be kind of ticked off on you. So you got to be really careful about that. So I had to find a way to get the message out there, but I wanted it to be in my own way, not just a way that everyone else does. So I figured the best opportunity would be my art books. Now, the first one, Traces, an Autistic Pathway to Creative Expression, talks about the daydreaming aspect of autism. Kind of like when they're pacing around or looking up to the sky and whatnot, they kind of enter their own world. But what a lot of people miss on that is that just because autistic people daydream doesn't necessarily mean that they're cut off from the rest of the world. Far from it. It could be their way of brainstorming or coping with the current situation, kind of playing the different scenarios in their head. Now, the one I just recently published, On the Trail with Annie and Angel, that's actually a book where I focus on bonding between parent and kid, which can be a challenge at times. Whether you're an autistic kid or a neurotypical kid, everyone goes through the trouble of bonding with their parents and parents bonding with their kids. So with this, I tell a story where a mother and daughter are walking the same path, but at the same time they don't see eye to eye. They don't see the same thing. So I kind of play around with that. As for the conclusion, well, you have to read the book to find out. I can't spoil it.
You can't give it all away. I love it.
So new.
I love it.
Never reveals everything.
And that is so true. That's why we need that element of surprise, right? So,
Hmm.
so you say, Stephen, that living with autism is not an easy thing to explain, and sometimes we can't find the right words. And you say here on your website, what I bring to you is not just words, but an experience. Tell us different ways, including you say your books, but you've used photography also as a way to bring people into the eyes of a person living with autism. Tell us a little bit about how you developed that passion.
Well, here's the thing. Anyone can type up a bunch of words on like a document or a website, and suddenly it's so significant and it means something, but words can only tell so much. We're at a day and age now that a lot of people are more visual than anything else. They want to see it happen rather than just reading it and trying to imagine everything in their head. That's why, like, a lot of people would prefer to see the movies rather than reading the novels, even though the novels have a lot more content, but I digress. So what I wanted to do was, if I wanted to get the message out there about the life of an autistic, is that I couldn't do it with just words. I try to use, like, visual arts and visual appeal to kind of, as mentioned before, give them an experience, not just talking about it, so they can kind of visualize what may be going on in the mind of an autistic. Kind of like with my books, I always use illustrations to kind of emphasize on the text that I type in the books.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I feel like the artwork that I make can really help kind of push the message along and kind of emphasize on it. As for my photography work, I love doing freelance work where basically I can help other people get their message out there through my creative photography work, where people can just look at it and go, whoa, that's amazing. I wish I was there. Are they holding the event next year? So if I can get that kind of reaction, I know that I did a good job. Now, I'm also working on one other project, if we have time to talk about it.
Sure.
All right, so last year I wanted to investigate another branch or another opportunity, so I recently started a YouTube channel with my little brother Thomas called Tostemac, Tostemac. I know it's a terrible habit for me. I feel like I have to spell it. So on this channel, we do comedy videos of me and Thomas just goofing around in video games. Again, rolling back to the whole comedy thing being a challenge for me. But also on Saturdays, I do autism vlogs where I go over a variety of subjects or my personal experience with autism. So I do a little bit of research and then give my personal opinion on the matter and see what people think. At first, it kind of started out as just me sitting in front of a camera and rambling a bit about my personal experience. But as I started to do more of these vlogs and interact more with the audience within the autistic community and outside the autistic community, they started to become more evolved, for lack of a better word, because from there they started mentioning that, oh, they did this, or some people did research on that. So I actually started to do some research and in-depth analysis on certain subjects. And sometimes I would ask other people to join the vlogs and help out. Like a recent one I'm working on is talking about the experience of a single parent raising kids with autism. Now, I'm not a parent by any means of definition, but I found a YouTuber that was, so I kind of asked him to help out. That's going to be cool.
That's amazing. So tell us how our listeners can view your vlog. I understand it's on YouTube, and how they can get copies of your books, Stephen.
Oh, yeah. As mentioned, you can find them on YouTube, Tostemac. As for the books and whatnot, I have a link to the website. It's actually on one of my Facebook pages. It's called Stephen McAllister Autism Books. So if you go to like the About tab, it'll have a link to the website where you can access not only some of the artwork that I've done in the past, but also the books that I have on sale.
That's awesome. Stephen McAllister, author, speaker, and just an amazing, amazing artist. Thank you so
Well,
much.
I try to be.
Thank you so much for taking the time to educate us about your life with autism and bringing just the creativity that you've done to help people understand it. And you guys can actually view a lot of his beautiful photography right on his website and his Facebook page. He is on Facebook as Stephen McAllister, and that's Stephen spelled Steven, McAllister, MacAlester. We'd love to have you
Oh
back
my
again.
God, you actually got the spelling right.
Well, I'm looking right at your website.
Literally,
I've
you
learned
have no idea how many times people misspell it and whatnot. I mean, I know that's what happens when you mix a Scottish name and an Irish name, but still there's so many times you can correct a name.
Well, it's good to know that I got some brownie points there, and I've learned to just make sure that I have the person's website up as I'm looking at them, because I know how many times people jack up the name Alicia. My dad put an extra I at the end of my name and then put an SH in the middle, so trust me. I know what that feels like. Stephen, it has been a pleasure speaking with you today, and we'd love to have you back on the show in the future. How about when you come out with your third book?
Yeah, definitely. As soon as I publish my third book, I'll let you know.
Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. Thanks again.